Over 2 million people walk through a garden in eastern China each year. They arrive by tour bus, by train from Shanghai, by taxi through the narrow streets of Suzhou. They enter through stone gates, follow winding paths beside still water, and stop to photograph lotus flowers floating on the surface of ponds that seem to stretch in every direction. The garden is famous for its beauty. UNESCO lists it as a World Heritage Site. Travel guides call it one of the finest examples of classical Chinese garden design. Visitors spend an hour, sometimes two, moving slowly through carefully arranged scenes of water, rock, and green. They leave feeling they have seen something peaceful. Almost none of them notice that the garden is a machine, not a metaphor. A literal, functioning, self-regulating machine that has been operating continuously since the year 1509. It has no engine. It uses no electricity. It requires no pumps, no timers, no sensors, no monthly service visits. The water flows in on its own. The ponds stay clear without chemicals. The plants receive moisture without irrigation. The channels remain open without dredging. For over 500 years, this garden has watered itself, cleaned itself, and maintained its own climate, powered by nothing but gravity, biology, and the shape of the ground beneath it. The man who built it called himself too lazy to garden. His name was Wang Xianchen. In 1509, he was a retired imperial censor of the Ming dynasty, a man whose career had been spent investigating corruption among officials far more powerful than himself. He had watched guilty men walk free. He had written reports that were ignored. By the time he returned to his home city of Suzhou, he was done with all of it. He bought a piece of land on the site of an old temple, hired a painter named Wen Zhengming to help design the layout, and began building a garden. He named it the Humble Administrator's Garden. In Chinese, the word for humble carries a second meaning: inept, incompetent, unfit for responsibility. He was quoting a poet from the Jin dynasty named Pan Yue, who had written centuries earlier about the simple life of a man who irrigates his garden and grows vegetables because he is too humble, too inept, to do anything more important. Wang Xianchen was making a joke. He was telling the world that he had given up on ambition, that he planned to do nothing but tend plants and watch water for the rest of his life. What he actually did was spend years designing a system so precise, so carefully balanced, that once it was finished, it never needed him again. The garden ran itself, it still does. The joke is on everyone who believed him. Think of a software engineer who spends 6 months writing code that automates every task in his job. During those 6 months, he works harder than he ever has before. Then he hits deploy, leans back, and watches the program run. Wang Xianchen did the same thing. His code was written in stone, water, elevation, and living plants. The garden was his program. The setup took years. It has been running for 5 centuries. This challenges something most of us assume about the past. We imagine ancient builders as people who worked hard because they had no other choice, because they lacked the tools and knowledge to do anything else. But the sharpest minds of the Ming dynasty measured success differently. They did not ask how hard you worked. They asked how well you designed. A system that needed constant attention was a poorly designed system. A system that ran on its own was the goal. Laziness was not the failure, it was the achievement. Wang Xianchen understood something most modern homeowners have forgotten. The best garden is one that does not need you. And to build that garden, you have to start with the most reliable force on earth, one that has never once taken a day off. Suzhou sits in the Yangtze River Delta, threaded through with one of the largest canal networks ever built in China. The city has been called the Venice of the East, though it was already ancient when Venice was young. These canals are not decorative. They are infrastructure, a living network of waterways that has moved water through the city for over 1,000 years, connecting rivers, lakes, and the broader water system of the Delta region. The canals hold water at a steady, reliable height throughout the year. That height is the key to everything Wang Xianchen built. He placed his garden so that the canal entry point sat slightly higher in elevation than the garden's internal ponds. Just a few feet of difference, but that gap became the engine of the entire system. Water flows from high ground to low ground. It always has. You do not need to convince it, you do not need to pump it, you do not need to schedule it. You simply need to put your garden in the right place and open the right channels. The weight of the water in the canals, sitting at a higher elevation, pushes steadily downward into the garden's pond system. Gravity does all the work. Picture a water tower at the edge of a town. It sits high above the houses, filled with water. When you turn on your tap, no pump is needed at that moment. The weight of the water above you pushes it down through the pipes and into your home. The Suzhou canals function as Wang Xianchen's water tower. The garden ponds sit lower. Water flows in steadily, silently, driven by nothing but its own weight pressing forward through the channels. What makes this worth paying attention to is not the physics. The physics are simple, almost obvious once you see them. What matters is the permanence. A pump has moving parts, seals, bearings, components that wear out over time. A pump built in 1509 would have failed within a decade, maybe sooner. But the height difference between the canals and the garden ponds is a fixed fact of the earth. It was true in 1509. It is true today. It will be true 500 years from now. Wang Xianchen did not build an engine. He found one that already existed and connected his garden to it. The water flows in constantly, without effort, without cost, without anyone needing to turn a valve or check a gauge. But anyone who has ever owned a pond knows what happens to still water left alone. It turns green. It stagnates. Algae blooms spread across the surface. The water begins to smell. Oxygen levels drop, and anything living in that water struggles to survive. Getting water into the garden is only half the problem. The other half is keeping it clean. And Wang Xianchen did not install a filter. He grew one. Between 1/3 and 3/5 of the humble administrator's garden is water. Not a decorative pond tucked into a corner, but water as the main feature, the foundation around which everything else is arranged. Most of that water surface is covered in lotus. Visitors see the lotus and think it is beautiful, and they are correct. But beauty is a side effect. The lotus is working. Lotus roots reach deep into the sediment below the pond, sometimes penetrating several feet into the mud. They pull in nitrogen and phosphorus, the same nutrients that accumulate in any body of water where organic matter decays. These are the nutrients that feed algae. In a pond without plants, nitrogen and phosphorus build up until algae populations explode, turning the water green and choking out everything else. The lotus consumes those nutrients first, pulling them into its own tissues before algae ever get the chance. Studies of lotus ponds and aquaculture systems have measured this effect directly. Research published in environmental science journals shows that lotus ponds contribute significantly to the removal of chemical oxygen demand and total nitrogen from water. In one study, a lotus pond was responsible for removing nearly half of the total nitrogen passing through the system. The roots do not just absorb nutrients passively. They create an active biological zone in the sediment, supporting populations of bacteria that break down organic waste and convert it into forms the plant can use. Below the lotus canopy, submerged plants add a second layer of filtration. These plants release oxygen into the water from their leaves and stems, a process that happens continuously during daylight hours. The pond breathes. It cleans itself. It keeps its own chemistry in balance without anyone testing pH levels or adding chemicals to adjust the water quality. Your kidneys do something similar. You never think about them, but they filter around 200 liters of blood every single day, pulling out waste and returning clean fluid to your body. The lotus pond runs on the same principle. It filters continuously, needs no replacement cartridges, no chemical additives, no maintenance visits, and it gets better with age as the root systems grow deeper and more extensive. The lotus also shades the water surface. Shaded water stays cooler than water exposed to direct sunlight. Cooler water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water. More oxygen means a healthier pond, one that can support a wider range of life. Each function supports the next. The system does not just hold itself together. It slowly improves over time, becoming more stable, more resilient, more capable of handling disturbances. Most people assume a pond turns green because it is old, because something has gone wrong after years of neglect. It does not. A pond turns green because it is empty. No plants, no biology, nothing to process the waste that inevitably accumulates. A pond with the right plant life is a self-cleaning system, and Wang Xianqin's pond has had 500 years to mature. It is very good at its job by now. The water is clean. It flows in from the canals, gets filtered by the lotus and submerged plants, and sits clear in the ponds. But the trees and shrubs throughout the garden are planted in raised beds, sometimes 20 feet from the water's edge. The water is in the pond. The roots are in the soil. Something has to carry moisture from one to the other, and it does, underground, without anyone asking it to. If you could cut through the garden beds like slicing a cake, you would not find plain dirt all the way down. In classical Chinese gardens like this one, beds are often built over layers of rubble, gravel, and sometimes charcoal. These materials are full of tiny gaps, microscopic channels that water clings to and travels through, pulled by a force called capillary action. Dip the corner of a paper towel into a glass of water and watch what happens. The water climbs. It moves upward against gravity, spreading through the fibers of the paper, pulled by the attraction between water molecules and the material they are moving through. The charcoal and stone beneath the garden beds do exactly this, but across a much larger area, moving sideways as well as upward. Water seeps from the pond into the underground layers, then travels through the charcoal and stone, rising gradually to meet the roots of the plants above. The plants drink from below. Nobody waters them from above. Charcoal, when used in these systems, is a deliberate choice. It holds moisture and releases it slowly, acting as a buffer during dry spells. It also supports populations of microorganisms that keep soil healthy, breaking down organic matter and making nutrients available to plant roots. And it lasts. A charcoal layer placed underground centuries ago could still be doing its job today, quietly working in the dark where no one sees it. Now think about how most gardens are watered today. Sprinklers spray water into the air, where a large portion evaporates before it ever reaches the soil. What does land often runs off the surface or drains straight past the root zone, moving too quickly for the soil to absorb it. The plants get a fraction of what was applied. The rest is wasted. Wang Xianqin's system delivers water directly to the roots from below, at a pace the soil can absorb. Almost nothing evaporates. Almost nothing runs off. We water from the top because that is how rain works, and we built our habits around rain. But rain is unpredictable. A capillary system is constant. The soil stays at a steady moisture level, not too wet and not too dry, because the underground layers are always drawing from the pond and always releasing to the roots. The plants never go through the stress of drought followed by flood. They grow in a stable environment, and stable environments produce long-lived plants. The ground stays moist from below, but Suzhou has dry seasons, hot weeks where even the ponds lose water to evaporation. The garden has a response to that as well, and it runs entirely at night while everyone is asleep. The walls of the humble administrator's garden are tall, thick stone and plaster, rising well above head height and wrapping the entire garden in a continuous boundary. Most visitors assume they are there for privacy, or to mark the property line, or simply because that is how classical Chinese gardens were traditionally built. All of those things are true, but none of them are the main function. The walls are a climate machine. During the day, the sun heats the air outside the garden. Inside the walls, the large pond surfaces keep the air cooler and much more humid. The walls hold that cool, moist air in place, trapping it, concentrating it, stopping it from drifting away into the drier air outside. The garden creates its own small weather system. The air inside the walls is measurably different from the air just outside. A recent study published in 2025 examined the microclimate regulation effects of 3 classical gardens in Suzhou, including the humble administrator's garden. The research measured temperature and relative humidity within the gardens and found that water bodies, vegetation, and architectural features like walls work together to create cooler, more humid conditions than the surrounding urban environment. Then night falls. Temperatures drop. and something happens that the garden has been counting on since the day the walls were built. Stand in a bathroom after a hot shower and watch what happens to the mirror. It fogs. Warm, moist air meets the cooler glass surface, and the water in that air turns to droplets. The garden walls do the same thing every single night. As temperatures fall after sunset, the moisture trapped inside the garden condenses on the stone walls, on the rock surfaces, on the undersides of leaves. Dew forms. It drips. It rolls down the stone and into the soil. It collects in the crevices where ferns grow. It coats the moss, covering every surface with that deep, ancient green that gives the garden its timeless quality. The moss, the ferns, the lichens clinging to stone, these are the plants that make visitors feel they are walking through something old, something that has been here longer than memory. They survive because the walls produce moisture for them every night, driven by nothing but the temperature difference between day and night. In most garden design, a wall marks where the garden ends. In this garden, the wall is where the climate system begins. It traps humidity, generates condensation, and creates a protected environment that keeps plants alive through conditions that would kill them in an open space. The water flows in from the canals, the lotus cleans it, the charcoal carries it to the roots. The walls pull moisture from the night air. But there is one enemy that eventually destroys every water system ever built. Silt, sand, sediment. The slow, quiet buildup that clogs channels and turns a flowing system into a blocked one, unless the channels are shaped to handle it on their own. There are no straight water channels in the humble administrator's garden. Every waterway bends, every canal curves. Visitors photograph these winding paths because they are beautiful, and they are. But beauty is a side effect. The curves are quietly one of the most practical decisions in the entire garden. Here is the problem with straight channels. Water flows at a uniform speed across the full width. Silt and sediment settle evenly across the bottom. Over time, the channel fills from the bottom up. It narrows, it slows, it clogs. This is why modern drainage systems need constant dredging. Straight pipes work well at first and cause problems later. A curved channel behaves differently. When water moves through a bend, the water on the outside edge travels a longer path than the water on the inside. To keep up, the outer water moves faster. That speed difference creates a slow rolling motion in the water that pushes heavier particles, sand, silt, and debris toward the slower inner bank. The silt collects in predictable spots along the inside of each curve. The main channel stays clear. The water keeps moving. Stir a cup of tea with loose leaves at the bottom and watch what happens. The leaves gather toward the center or the edges, sorted by the circular motion, concentrated in specific spots rather than spread evenly. The curved channels do the same thing continuously with every liter of water that passes through. The silt is sorted. The channel stays open. This is basic fluvial geomorphology, the same principle that shapes meandering rivers across the world. Rivers naturally develop curves because the curves help them manage sediment. Erosion happens on the outer bank where water moves faster. Deposition happens on the inner bank where water slows down. What makes this genuinely clever is where the silt ends up. It collects along the inner curves, in spots that are easy to reach and easy to clear. Once a year, someone with a simple tool can remove the buildup from those predictable locations. The channel never fully clogs because the shape prevents it. Compare that to a modern buried drainage pipe, clogging in a location you cannot see, requiring excavation to reach and equipment to clear. The curves also create the garden's famous look, the winding waterways, the sense of discovery as the path follows the water around each bend. Every beautiful curve is a self-cleaning mechanism. The art and the engineering are the same decision. So here is the complete picture. Gravity pulls water in from the canals. Lotus and submerged plants clean it. Layered soils and stone carry it to the roots. Walls trap humidity and produce dew. Curves keep the channels clear. No electricity, no pumps, almost no replacement parts, no monthly bill. Running on the same basic principles since 1509. The question that has been sitting underneath this entire story is the one we need to answer now. If this system works so well, why are we still standing in our backyards holding a garden hose? The answer is not ignorance. The engineers who designed modern irrigation systems understood passive water management. The landscape architects who built suburban gardens in the 20th century had access to centuries of knowledge about gravity-fed systems, biological filtration, and natural drainage. The shift away from passive, permanent systems was not made because people forgot how to build them. It was made out of economics. A gravity-fed, lotus-filtered, capillary-wicking garden has no recurring costs. Once built, it runs. No replacement parts, no service contracts, no seasonal maintenance packages, no subscriptions. It generates zero ongoing revenue for anyone. From a business standpoint, it is a terrible product because it only needs to be sold once. The modern gardening industry generates billions of dollars every year. Irrigation controllers, drip line systems, replacement sprinkler heads, chemical fertilizers, water bills, smart sensors, app-connected monitors. Each of those products exists because the system it belongs to is fragile and dependent on outside inputs. Cut the electricity and the smart controller goes dark. Crack a pipe and the drip system floods the yard. Every failure is a sale. Every breakdown is a service call. Every season is a new reason to buy something because what you bought last season wore out or became obsolete. Wang Xianqin's garden does not create customers. It creates a satisfied owner and then asks for nothing more. That is not a workable business model in a system built around recurring revenue, so we stopped teaching people how to build it. Not through conspiracy, not through deliberate suppression, but through the quiet logic of markets that reward products you have to keep buying. There is a useful comparison here. The Dujiangyan irrigation system in Sichuan province was built around 256 BC, over 2,200 years ago. It uses many of the same core principles as the humble administrator's garden: gravity-fed water flow, curved and split channels that manage sediment instead of fighting it, natural topography doing the work that dams and pumps would otherwise require. It still irrigates vast areas of farmland today. It has never been fundamentally replaced. It has survived floods, dynasties, wars, and every wave of new technology that has passed through China over 2 millennia. The people who built it understood something we have spent the last century unlearning. A system built around permanent natural forces is more reliable than any system built around manufactured ones. Modern smart garden systems are sold on the promise of control. Monitor your soil moisture from your phone. Set watering schedules to the minute. Receive alerts when something goes wrong. What the marketing leaves out is that all of that control depends on a chain of components. Electricity, Wi-Fi, plastic fittings, rubber seals, battery-powered sensors, each with its own failure rate and replacement cycle. The system is only as reliable as its weakest part. And in a system with dozens of parts, something is always close to failing. The humble administrator's garden depends on gravity, stone, charcoal, lotus, and the shape of the earth. Gravity does not experience power outages. Stone does not need software updates. Charcoal does not expire. Lotus does not require a replacement cartridge. These components operate on timescales that make a 5-year product warranty look like a rounding error. Something has been shifting in recent years. Interest in ancient self-watering garden methods has grown significantly. Permaculture designers are returning to the principles behind gardens like this one: gravity-fed water systems, biological filtration, capillary wicking, microclimate management through wall placement. The interest is growing because people are tired. Tired of fighting their gardens, tired of the water bills and the broken sprinkler heads and the soil that turns to concrete in August. They want a garden that works with them, not against them. That blueprint was written in Suzhou in 1509 by a man who called himself too lazy to garden. Wang Xianqin spent years designing a system that would outlast him, outlast his children, outlast the dynasty he had served. He planned for permanence in a world that was already beginning to reward speed. 500 years later, his garden is still running, still filtering water through lotus roots, still wicking moisture to the roots of trees, still dripping with dew every morning, still cleaning its own channels with every liter of water that moves through its curves. The sprinkler system you installed 3 summers ago is already showing cracks in the fittings. Wang Xianchen called himself the humble, inept administrator, a man too lazy to garden. What he built was a system so well designed that it has outlasted every dynasty, every war, and every wave of new technology that came after it. The water still flows in from the canals. The lotus still cleans it. The charcoal still carries it to the roots. The walls still drip with dew every morning. 500 years, and the garden has never once asked for help. That is not laziness. That is what it looks like when someone builds something right the first time.